Welcome to Afro Tales Nyayas. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel for more stories. As we are reading, share your thoughts in the comments and share the link with your loved ones. The Promise We Almost Broke. A story of love, stubbornness, and second chances. Everyone in Tafara knew Maria Tome, not in the way people know celebrities or the wealthy, but in the quiet, unavoidable way a neighborhood comes to know someone who has made an impression simply by existing with such fierce intentionality. It wasn't fame that preceded her, and it certainly wasn't fortune. It was something far more memorable. Maria had, over the course of 24 years, perfected the art of looking permanently, exquisitely annoyed, a gift she wore as naturally as her skin. She moved through the world with a kind of focused determination that left little room for idle conversation or unnecessary distractions. During the day, she worked, showing up early and leaving late, the type of employee who made supervisors feel grateful and slightly guilty. At night she studied, her lamp burning long after the rest of the street had gone quiet, her textbooks open beside a cold cup of tea she kept forgetting to drink. She had no patience for nonsense, and she had built her life accordingly. It was lean, purposeful, and moving forward. Unfortunately for Farai Joko, nonsense had a way of finding him no matter where he went, and it seemed particularly fond of following him into Maria's orbit. Farai was the kind of man who made friends the way other people breathe. He did it without trying, indefinitely, not thinking, almost without noticing. Within 5 minutes of meeting a stranger, he would know their name, their mother's name, and at least one embarrassing story from their childhood. At 26, he ran a small mechanic workshop alongside his uncle on the edge of the neighborhood, and he had become something of a local institution, known for his quick hands with an engine, his even quicker jokes, and an absolutely unstoppable habit of filling every available silence with words. The first time they met, it was entirely his fault. Farai came around the corner of the busy bus stop at the kind of speed that suggested he was either very late or very enthusiastic about life in general, and he collided with Maria with enough force to send everything flying. Papers burst upwards into the afternoon air like startled birds. A water bottle she had been carrying rolled cheerfully across the road as though it had been waiting for the opportunity to escape. A nearby vendor, who had clearly seen enough of life to appreciate comedy when it fell directly in front of him, threw his hands up and shouted, "Ah! Young man, are you proposing or fighting?" The entire bus stop dissolved into laughter. Maria was not laughing. She stood there, papers scattered around her feet, looking up at this tall, sheepish stranger with an expression that could have curdled milk at 20 paces. "You," she said slowly and deliberately, "should be arrested for reckless walking." Farai blinked at her, genuinely uncertain if he had heard correctly. Reckless walking. "Yes," she said, already crouching to collect her papers. "Is that even a crime?" he asked, because he genuinely wanted to know. "It should be," she replied, without looking up. The crowd laughed even harder. Someone near the back applauded. Farai, to his credit, grinned, not the defensive grin of someone trying to escape a situation but the genuine, helpless grin of a man who had just encountered something extraordinary. Maria did not grin back. She gathered her things, straightened her back, and walked away with the dignified composure of someone who had not, in fact, just had her afternoon derailed by a human wrecking ball. She maintained that composure for approximately 3 days. Then, alone in her room on a quiet Tuesday evening, something about the look on his face, that absurd, unrepentant grin, rose up in her memory, and she laughed until her stomach hurt. Farai made his decision with the kind of certainty usually reserved for engineering calculations and football predictions. He was in love with this woman, and that was simply that. His friends, upon hearing this announcement, reached an equally certain conclusion: he had lost his mind entirely. "That girl," his best friend Tawanda said, setting down his drink with the gravity of someone about to deliver terrible news. "The one who nearly had you arrested for the crime of walking." "She's beautiful," Farai said simply. "She's dangerous," Tawanda replied. Farai ignored him with the practiced ease of someone who had been ignoring Tawanda's sensible advice for years. What followed was a campaign of pursuit so transparent that it became neighborhood entertainment. For weeks, Farai engineered reasons to exist in the vicinity of Maria's street, each excuse more creative and less convincing than the last. One afternoon he purchased an entire bag of vegetables from a vendor near her house despite having a fully stocked kitchen at home. Another day he stopped to buy airtime at a corner shop when his phone was already loaded with enough credit to call every person he had ever met twice. His friends began referring to him, with great affection and zero subtlety, as Mr. Coincidence. The afternoon Maria finally confronted him about it was a warm Thursday, the kind of day that makes everything feel slightly more significant. She planted herself directly in his path and looked at him with those sharp, assessing eyes of hers. Are you following me? Farai, who had been mid-sip of a cold drink, came very close to choking on it. No, he said, when he had recovered. Then why have I seen you 4 separate times today? Her tone was patient in the way that suggested it would not remain so. Farai's mind moved quickly through his options and settled on the least convincing one available. I enjoy exercise. You were on a combi, she said. I saw you through the window. A lesser man might have surrendered. Exercise of the mind, Farai said, with great dignity. Maria stared at him for a long moment. Then, despite every effort she appeared to be making to prevent it, the corner of her mouth moved. She smiled. It was small. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. But it was real, and it was directed at him, and in that moment Farai Joko felt as though the entire world had rearranged itself into a more pleasing configuration. He nearly fainted, right there on the pavement. He considered it a victory. Not everyone celebrated the growing warmth between Farai and Maria. In fact, for at least one person in their circle, each new development felt like a quiet catastrophe. Rutendo had carried her feelings for Farai for years with the careful, private devotion of someone tending a garden they have never shown to anyone. She had imagined, in the detailed and elaborate way that hope sometimes works, what it might look like to be Mrs. Joko, the easy companionship of it, the laughter, the future she had sketched in her mind during slow afternoons. And then Maria Tome had walked into the picture, or rather, Farai had walked into Maria, and the sketch had been crumpled up and tossed aside. Rutendo's disappointment curdled quietly into something sharper. Whenever Farai was absent from their social group, she found small, careful ways to chip at Maria's image. She thinks she's better than everyone, she would say, with a casual shrug that she had rehearsed until it looked natural. She's too serious, Farai needs someone who actually knows how to laugh. And, with the particular skill of someone who has had practice, she would add these observations into conversations where they seemed almost incidental, almost accidental, almost kind. Farai, who possessed the cheerful emotional blindness of someone who believes everyone is essentially good-natured, never noticed. Maria, meanwhile, was navigating a complication of her own, one that arrived with flowers. Brian was the kind of man who made a strong first impression. He was a university student, polished and well-spoken, from a family that had money in the comfortable, unhurried way that suggests it had been there for generations. He was handsome in a studied way, the way of someone who was aware of the fact and had arranged himself accordingly. He had noticed Maria at a community event and had decided, with the breezy confidence of someone who had not often been told no, that he was interested. Maria was not. Brian received this information and interpreted it, generously, as an opening position in a negotiation. Each week brought a new delivery of intent. Flowers, always the expensive kind, never the kind she might have actually liked. Chocolate in a box with a ribbon. Invitations to lunch at restaurants that were designed to impress rather than to nourish. Maria declined all of them with consistent, unwavering politeness, which Brian consistently interpreted as encouragement. Farai told himself he was not bothered. He repeated this to himself with great frequency, particularly on the afternoon he happened to see Brian's car slowing to a stop outside Maria's gate, and Maria getting out, turning back to say something through the window with a small, polite smile. His stomach performed a maneuver that had nothing to do with hunger. That night, sleep came late and left early. The next morning at the workshop, his assistant found him bent over an engine with the focused, slightly glazed expression of a man doing physical work while his mind was very much elsewhere. Boss. What? The car is fixed. Farai looked up. I know. You've repaired it 3 times, the assistant said carefully. Farai looked back down at the engine for a moment. Then he put down his wrench and went to make himself a cup of tea. It was an ordinary evening in every way that evenings can be ordinary, the light going golden and soft, the neighborhood settling into its familiar after-work rhythms, except that Farai had decided, with quiet and uncharacteristic seriousness, that he was going to say the thing he had been not saying for weeks. They were sitting beneath a jacaranda tree at the edge of the park, the purple blossoms scattered across the ground around them like a careless painting. Maria had been telling him something about her day, and then she had stopped, because something in the way he was looking at her had changed the texture of the air between them. Maria. He said her name the way you say something you've been holding carefully. She waited. I love you. The words came out simply, without decoration or qualification, without the joke he might normally have reached for to soften a moment like this. No clever line. No careful hedge. Just the plain, unprotected truth of it, offered up in the golden evening light. The jacaranda blossoms moved gently in the breeze. Somewhere down the street, a child was calling to a friend. The world continued on around them, utterly indifferent to the fact that something significant was happening beneath this particular tree. Maria looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, the way she looked at things she was making sure of. I love you too, she said. And she meant it in the complete, unhurried way that meant she had thought about it and that the words were not new to her even if she was saying them for the first time. What followed was the kind of kiss that makes ordinary evenings extraordinary, the kind that people remember in their bones years later when they pass a jacaranda tree and feel, briefly and unexplainably, happy. A few days later, in the easy warmth of the days that followed their confession, they made each other a promise. It was said without ceremony, almost casually, the way the most important things sometimes are, that no matter what came between them, no matter what the world threw at them, no matter who tried to pull at what they had built, they would not allow outsiders to destroy it. They would not stop talking to each other. They would not let silence become a third person in their relationship. At the time, flushed with the particular confidence of new love, they believed it would be simple. The job offer came from Bulawayo, better money, better prospects, the kind of opportunity that a man building something for his future could not responsibly decline. Farai took it, and both of them approached the coming distance with the optimism of people who have never before tested what they are made of. In the beginning, everything held. Video calls that stretched past midnight, voices low so as not to wake the neighbors. Voice notes were sent throughout the day, small recordings of ordinary moments, as though they were mailing each other fragments of their days to keep as proof that the other person still existed, still thought of them, and still laughed at the same things. It felt, in those early weeks, almost manageable. Almost like an adventure. Then reality arrived, as it tends to, quietly and all at once. Work expanded to fill the space available for it, and then some. Schedules that had once aligned neatly began to slip past each other. A call missed on Monday became a shorter message on Tuesday and became a voice note on Wednesday that went unreturned until the weekend. The silences between communications grew, and in the spaces that opened up, things began to settle, small doubts, small fears, and the particular loneliness of missing someone who is not gone. Rutendo, who had been watching with patient attention, saw the opening she had been waiting for. She attended a company social event where Farai was present, a large, noisy gathering with the kind of crowd that makes proximity inevitable, and afterwards, she posted a selection of photographs online. In each one, she was standing very close to Farai, smiling at him. The images were not incriminating on their own, but they were carefully chosen, close enough to suggest something, vague enough to deny it. The comments arrived immediately. Speculation bloomed. People who did not know either of them well offered their confident interpretations. Maria saw the photos on a Thursday evening, sitting alone in the blue light of her phone screen. She felt the bottom of her stomach drop away. She did not call Farai. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment, and then she kept waiting, and in the waiting she turned the images over and over in her mind until they had acquired meanings they may not have originally possessed. She did not ask. She suffered in silence instead, which is a form of punishment that falls entirely on the person who chooses it. At the same time, Brian, who had not given up, who appeared constitutionally incapable of giving up, happened to be photographed beside Maria at a university function she attended for professional reasons. The photo was flattering, the framing suggestive of closeness. Brian posted it with a caption that implied a warmth between them that did not exist. Farai saw it on a Saturday morning while drinking his first cup of coffee, and the coffee went cold while he stared at the screen. Neither of them trusted enough to simply pick up the phone and ask what they were looking at. Both of them, instead, trusted the evidence of photographs and the interpretations of people who were not present. The arguments that followed were less about what had happened and more about everything that had gone unsaid, the accumulated weight of missed calls and shortened messages and the distance that had been growing not just in kilometers. Maybe you don't need me anymore, Maria said during one call, her voice tight with everything she was not saying. Maybe you found someone better, she added when he did not respond quickly enough. Farai's voice, when it came, had gone flat and hard. Funny. I was about to say the same thing. The line went dead. For the first time since the bus stop where papers had flown into the air and a vendor had asked if he was proposing or fighting, neither of them called back. The weeks that followed were inhabited by silence, not the comfortable kind, but the kind that has weight to it, that sits in a room and changes the air. Neither apologized. Neither reached out first. Each of them waited for the other to do the thing that neither was willing to do, and in that waiting, pride moved in and made itself at home. It is a peculiar kind of suffering, choosing stubbornness, you know you are doing it, and you continue anyway, because stopping would require admitting that you were wrong to start. Then Maria received the kind of news that rearranges your priorities without asking permission. Her mother collapsed suddenly and was rushed to the hospital. The doctors were careful with their words but not with their implications. The medical bills arrived quickly, as they do, with no consideration for what is manageable. The practical weight of it, the forms to fill, the family to coordinate, the quiet terror of waiting for test results in fluorescent corridors, pressed down on Maria until she felt close to breaking. One evening she sat outside the hospital on a low concrete wall in the particular exhaustion that arrives when you have been strong for too long. The night air was warm and smelled of the city. She was crying, the quiet, defeated kind, not the kind that releases anything. Then she heard a voice she had not heard in weeks. You look terrible, it said, and even through its gentleness it was somehow exactly the right thing. She looked up. Farai was standing there in the yellow light of the hospital entrance, a travel bag over his shoulder, shoes dusty from the road. He looked as though he had been traveling for hours, which he had, because he had heard, through the network of shared acquaintances that connects all small communities, that Maria's mother was ill, and he had packed a bag and come without calling ahead, without knowing if he would be welcome, without knowing anything except that he needed to be there. Maria burst into tears, the other kind this time, the kind that does release something. Farai sat down beside her on the low wall without a word. He put his arm around her shoulders. He did not say that everything would be fine because he didn't know that and because she would have known he was performing comfort rather than offering it. He simply held on, and she let him, and for a long while neither of them said anything at all. Then, in a voice made small by exhaustion and relief, Maria whispered, I missed you. Farai's voice, when it came, was not quite steady. I missed you too. Years later, when they would tell this story to people they loved, at dinner tables, at weddings, in the slow evenings of a life built together, they would both say that this was the moment. Not the bus stop, not the jacaranda tree, not the promise. This, a low concrete wall outside a hospital, in the middle of a difficult night, his arm around her shoulders and neither of them pretending to be fine. As Maria's mother slowly, stubbornly began to recover, showing, as it turned out, a characteristic stubbornness that explained quite a lot about her daughter, the architecture of what had nearly broken Farai and Maria apart began to reveal itself. Rutendo, in the way that guilt sometimes works when given enough time, eventually said too much to the wrong person, and the truth found its way back. She had posted those photographs deliberately. She had chosen them carefully, framed them with intention, and waited. The admission came in pieces, first a vague confession to a mutual friend, then the full story, and then the inevitable moment when it reached the people it most concerned. Brian's part unraveled separately. He had posted that photograph with the specific intention of creating an impression, and the impression had worked, he admitted as much, with the slightly sheepish confidence of someone who is apologizing without being entirely sorry. The manipulations, laid out plainly in the daylight, looked smaller than they had felt in the dark. Farai was furious, the focused, quiet kind of furious that is actually more unsettling than the loud kind. Maria was embarrassed by how completely she had been moved by something she should have simply asked about. But underneath both of those feelings, shared between them, was something more sobering. They had nearly lost each other not because of what Rutendo had done, not because of what Brian had done, but because they had stopped talking. They had looked at photographs and accepted interpretations instead of simply saying, out loud, to each other, I saw something that frightened me. Is it true? The promise they had made under the jacaranda tree had not been broken by jealous friends or ambitious admirers. It had nearly been broken by their own silence. One warm evening they sat together outside Maria's house, the neighborhood settling into its nighttime sounds around them. Farai held her hand, not dramatically, just naturally, the way you hold something you know the value of. We almost broke our promise, he said. Maria was quiet for a moment, watching the street. But we didn't. No. She turned to look at him. Because we're stubborn. Farai laughed, a real one, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in the chest. Very stubborn. Especially you, Maria said. Excuse me. You repaired the same engine 3 times because you were jealous, she said, with the composure of someone delivering a fact. Farai groaned in a way that communicated profound suffering. How do you know about that? The entire workshop knows, Maria said. Your assistant told his cousin. His cousin told the vegetable vendor. The vendor told me. I need new staff, Farai said. Maria smiled, and this time, she let it stay. 3 years is not such a long time, measured in the abstract. But in those 3 years, a great deal of living happened. Maria completed her qualifications and became a teacher, the kind that students talk about long after they have left her class, the kind whose lessons attach themselves to people and stay. She was strict, demanding, and absolutely devoted to the work, which surprised no one who had known her for more than 5 minutes. Farai, who had returned to Harare with savings, experience, and the particular drive of someone who has spent enough time working for other people, opened his own automotive workshop. It grew steadily, the way things tend to grow when the person behind them is both talented and willing to put in the unreasonable hours. Within 2 years it had a reputation that extended well beyond the neighborhood. Together they built something, not just between themselves, but in the practical, daily sense, a life with furniture and habits and disagreements resolved and meals cooked and quiet evenings and the particular comfort of someone who knows your history. The proposal, when it came, was vintage Farai, entirely public, only slightly ridiculous, and completely sincere. He had chosen the bus stop. The very bus stop, the one with the vendor who had asked his famous question, the one where papers had once flown into the air on an ordinary afternoon and started something neither of them had planned. He had spoken to the vendor in advance. He had coordinated with family members who now lurked behind various parked cars and vendor stalls with the unconvincing casualness of people who are very bad at hiding. Maria approached along the familiar street, already aware that something was happening, because the neighborhood had never been subtle, and then Farai stepped forward from the small crowd that had gathered with the energy of people who had known something was coming. He knelt. The street erupted before he had even produced the ring. An old woman near the front, who had clearly been waiting for this moment and had strong feelings about it, did not wait for Maria to respond. "Girl," she announced, with the authority of someone who has seen many things, "say yes before he changes his mind." The crowd laughed. Maria laughed too, proper, full laughter, the kind she had once spent 3 days refusing to let Farai see. Tears ran freely down her face, and she made no effort whatsoever to stop them. "Yes, Farai," she said. "Yes." The cheering that followed could be heard, by various accounts, from 3 streets away. They married some months later in a ceremony attended by friends, by family, and by a significant portion of Tafara who felt, with some justification, that they had been part of this story from the beginning. At the reception, Tawanda, who had once called Maria dangerous and Farai insane, and who had been wrong about both assessments in the best possible way, rose to give a toast. "I would like everyone here to remember," he said, with great gravity, "that the first time Farai met Maria, she threatened to have him arrested for walking." The room dissolved. Maria covered her face with both hands. Farai, standing beside her with the glass in his hand and the easy smile of a man who has arrived exactly where he intended to be, looked at her with uncomplicated joy. "And now," he said, "she's sentenced me to life." Maria lowered her hands. "Without parole," she replied. The room roared. Later, after the speeches and the cake and the photographs, as the music played and the stars did their quiet work above the city, Maria and Farai found each other on the dance floor and stayed there, moving slowly through a song that neither of them would be able to name afterwards but both would remember forever. They had come through jealous friends and a distance that nearly undid them. They had survived rumors they had believed too easily and silences that had lasted too long. They had let pride stand between them and then chosen, in a hospital car park on a hard night, to put it down. The promise they had almost broken had not broken them. It had, instead, become the foundation of everything they built, not because love is simple or because people are uncomplicated, but because they had learned, the hard way and together, that the most important thing is to keep talking. And from that night onward, their story was no longer about how they almost lost each other. It was about how they chose, every day, not to. Thank you for subscribing to Afro Tales Nyayas. Click your notification button for more stories. Remember to share your thoughts in the comments and share the link with your loved ones.